Well, hello. My name is Stuart Blickstein, and welcome to the course that I've put together for OLLI. It's an older course, originally done, maybe back in 2012, maybe a little more recently than that, designed, of course, for the classroom and designed to be an interactive course. I've tried to modify this, and I hope it's been successful, so that you can see it as a more complete video, and yet keeping the general idea that this is a quiz kind of a course, or that there's a quiz incorporated into it. That, of course, has been done given the COVID-19 isolation that we are currently in, and trying to give you folks and myself something to do during our time of isolation. One or two quick notes before I start. The first one is that much of my narration has come from various sources, Wikipedia, various art dealers, other kinds of sources, and some from my own mind. I have been careful to try to avoid copyright infringement and think and hope that I've been successful. We'll find out soon enough when this goes live whether I've accomplished that. If I have accidentally infringed any copyright, I'm sure I'll be let know, and I will make the appropriate changes to the course. The course is done as a quiz, and what you will find is I'm going to show you a painting by a well-known artist, but not a well-known painting, something that is very much out of that artist's usual genre. And I'm going to give you a few hints and ask you to see if you can take a guess as to who the artist is. To help in that, I've put a list of artists across the bottom of each screen. The artist who is represented is on that list. However, I will caution you that there are artists on the list who are not represented in the course. However, if you guess an artist and that artist is not on the list on the bottom of this screen, rest assured that that is not the answer that I am looking for. Okay, I think that's enough to start. Let's get going. Okay, here's the first painting. Well-known artist, but perhaps not as well-known as some of the others who will appear on other slides. I've chosen this one, however, because it's got some characteristics that I am hoping will fool you. Any ideas yet? Any familiarity? Well, let's look at the hint box and see if I can help you. Hint number one, this painting is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And if you have been there, or if you frequent there, you may be familiar with the painting itself. Two, the title. This should be a big hint or a great misleader. The title of the painting is Gala, Eluard. And the third hint, it's based on a photograph by the famous photographer Man Ray. Any ideas yet? Remember, you can look at the bottom to see a list of the possible answers. Okay, let's move on. Okay, here we have it. The painting is not by Salvador Dali, but by Max Ernst. Max Ernst was a German painter, sculptor, graphic artist, and a poet. Prolific artist, Ernst was a primary pioneer in the Dada movement and in surrealism. This oil on canvas is an evocative portrait which reveals the deeply intertwined personal and artistic lives of the members of the surrealist circle and depicts the movement's fascination with dreamlike states. Gala Eluard was a muse and lover to three members of the surrealist movement: her two husbands, poet Paul Eluard and artist Salvador Dali, and Max Ernst, who painted this work based on Man Ray's photograph of Eluard's eyes. With curious forms rising out of her unfurling head, Eluard becomes an imagined embodiment of surrealism's wide-eyed interest in art's power to explore the mysterious territories of the unconscious mind. To the next work. It's another work by a famous artist, but again out of the artist's usual eye, so to speak. In the hint box, we can see that the painting was painted by the artist at the age of 15, and this painting was a member of what is called the social realism movement. Any idea yet? Whoops, I messed something up. Again, there we are, there's the third hint. Then that's that the artist's father himself was a painter. I think you'll find me having a little technical difficulty now and then. I'm hoping not too much. Any idea who the painter was? Let's see. This painting is Science and Charity by Pablo Picasso. It's a work related to his idea of social realism, a trending style during the second half of the 19th century. The expansion of the Industrial Revolution had consolidated the bourgeoisie, and they needed to flaunt their new status. Influenced by writers such as Émile Zola, some painters began to paint works in for this new bourgeoisie who liked social realism. The interest in science and medical topics made this theme recur across Europe. So hospital paintings emerged, a subgenre of social realism which flourished between 1880 and 1900. The composition of this large painting follows a classical structure, where all of the characters contribute towards aiming the focus of all our attention on the sick patient. Notice the eyes of the bystanders, the hand of the doctor, for example. The ambience and room dimensions contribute to create an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. The models are interesting. The doctor is actually José Ruiz Blasco, Picasso's father, and he represents modern medicine or modern medical progress. The child is a neighborhood beggar, and its son, who Picasso hired as models for a total of 10 pesetas. It's believed that the nun was a friend or a teenager that Picasso used, asking her to dress up in the costumes of a nun friend, a friend of the family, who came from Malaga but resided at that time in Barcelona. The nun represents existential relief. We can take a look here at some of Picasso's painting progression. Wow, that's a mouthful. In his portrait of Gertrude Stein, done in the early 1900s. It demonstrates some angular distortions that are not seen in his prior work, and it's a formal experimentation that would characterize his artwork. Note, for example, the nose, which shows some rather strong triangularization, representing the cubism that was to come shortly. And here, of course, we have what is possibly Picasso's most famous work, the Guernica. It's certainly his most powerful political statement. It was painted as such, and there's an immediate reaction to the Nazis' devastating casual bombing practice on the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. Guernica shows the tragedies of wars and the suffering it inflicts upon individuals, particularly innocent civilians. This work has gained a monumental status, becoming a perpetual reminder of the tragedies of war, an anti-war symbol, and as an embodiment of peace. On its completion, Guernica was displayed around the world on a brief tour, becoming famous and widely acclaimed. The tour helped bring the Spanish Civil War to the world's attention. This work is seen as an amalgamation of pastoral and epic styles. The discarding of color with only a little bit of blue against the black and white painting intensifies the drama, producing a reportage quality, sort of as in a photographic record. Guernica is, as I said, blue, black, and white, 11 feet tall, and 26.5 feet wide. A mural-sized canvas, but painted in oil. The painting can be seen in the Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid. A tapestry of the painting, by the way, may be seen. I believe it's at the United Nations building in New York. And on to the next painting. Little watercolor. It's the artist's earliest known painting. Landscape, which depicts the artist's birthplace. And here's a hint that might really help you. Mustache. Not mine. Salvador Dali is the artist, and the title of the painting is A Landscape Near Figueras, done in 1910. It's a watercolor on a postcard, and it's believed to be his earliest surviving painting, produced when he was somewhere between 6 and 10 years old. Dali's subject in those early years, landscapes and buildings in and around Figueras, an area and Cadaqués, the areas in which he was most familiar. In the 1994 catalog called Dali, The Early Years by Ian Gibson, Gibson made the observation his earliest known pictures, several tiny watercolors of the Emperada countryside near Figueras, revealed an acute sensitivity to the nature of meadows, skies, animals, mountains, and water. The landscape depicts an area near Dali's birthplace, and the artist uses a rather sophisticated color palette, especially for someone so young, depicting the rich greens in the foliage and the foreground with vivid pink roof buildings in the distance. Shadowy mountains rise in the background, framing this typical village scene, and the sky is thinly painted, which is useful to notice in the side, revealing a blank postcard with a checkered corner design. And I've given you a little enlarged view of that. This small painting measures only 5.5 by 3.5 inches, was formerly in the collection of Gala's first husband, Paul Eluard, mentioned previously, and is now in the Dali Museum as a request of Albert Field of New York, who is Dali's unofficial, let's say, archivist. Note and remember the idea that Dali started with landscapes, because they do appear in his later, better-known paintings, such as The Persistence of Memory. Notice the landscape in the background of this painting. It's just a dream, an hallucination, an allusion to the passage of time or to mortality. Some even say that the melting clocks are a reference to Einstein's theory of relativity. Take your choice. When asked, Dali himself quipped that they reminded him of camembert cheese melting in the sun. Given the ants that are in the lower left are symbols of decay, I choose inconsistency or impermanence as time as my impression or my view. Also take a look at the animal, if that's what it is, in the center of the painting. Can you see a nose, an eye, a Dali self-portrait? And of course the landscape background, a reference perhaps to Cadaqués. Give you a little time to savor this remarkable painting. And another test, so to speak. Any ideas? This almost looks to me like some of the views that I've seen recently on television. Here are some hints. The artist was not born in the New York represented here or the Chicago, right? But was born in Wisconsin, raised in Virginia, schooled in Chicago and in New York. The artist died at the very advanced age of 98 and was married to photographer Alfred Stieglitz. That's a pretty good hint. Any idea yet? Georgia O'Keeffe. And this is a view from the Shelton Hotel in New York. View of the East River, an oil on canvas from 1928. O'Keeffe lived in the Shelton Hotel between 1925 and 36, and she took advantage of her bird's eye view from an apartment on the 30th floor to capture this panoramic aerial view of the East River waterfront looking across to Long Island City, Queens. It's rendered in dull tones and pictured with factory stats belching filthy smoke into the air, a hazy composition representing an inhospitable, that is, industrial landscape that betrays the painter's increasing dissatisfaction with modern urban life. The Shelton Hotel, you can see a picture of it on the right side, right, is now called the New York Marriott East Side. It's on 48th Street in Lexington, still active. And it was opened as the Shelton in 1924, then the tallest hotel at 31 stories in the world. It was also pioneering in art itself, and there was a first hotel to use step-back architecture, which is, of course, why I decided to show you a picture of it. This is more familiar Georgia O'Keeffe work. The Cow's Skull in red, white, and blue from 1931, and Inside Red Kana from 1919. The Cow's Skull. Weary of life in the metropolis, as you can guess from the previous painting, O'Keeffe began taking regular retreats in Lake George, New York, and then on to New Mexico. After the first extended trip to the Southwest in 1929, her artistic interest shifted from the buildings in New York to the nature of New Mexico. In this somewhat later work, O'Keeffe isolates a single skull of a cow skull or a bull skull, highlighting its jagged edges, worn surfaces, and bleached color. To O'Keeffe, such bones represented the desert's enduring beauty and the strength of the American spirit, which is alluded to in the striped background In 1949, O'Keeffe settled permanently in New Mexico, where she lived until her death in 1956. As a quick aside, if you had the opportunity to be in New Mexico, a trip to her home, which still exists, is a wonderful day's diversion. Inside Guernica, which she had done earlier, she painted an extreme close-up of the canna lily, entitled Inside Guernica. It's an erotic depiction of the large petals of the exterior of the flower, with a focus on the interior through the use of contrasting shades of colors. The painting was made with red, orange, brown, and pink paint. O'Keeffe's her flower paintings, are often viewed as erotic and often associated with Freud and Havelock Ellis's worldview. It may be that this view came from her husband, photographer Alfred Stieglitz, rather than from O'Keeffe herself. It is he, a fan of Freud and Ellis, who declared, "Woman feels the world differently than man feels it. The woman receives the world through her womb. Mind comes second." Note, those are Stieglitz's words, not mine. O'Keeffe herself did not condone this interpretation, stating quite clearly, "When people read erotic symbols in my paintings, they're talking about their own affairs." The 22 by 17-inch abstract painting is owned by private collectors. Okay, on to the next one. Western scene. Covered wagons, horses. Well, the artist was born in Cody, Wyoming. Artist also was a student of Thomas Harte Benton, who you may well know, and we'll see a piece of his work also. And the artist was a subject of a movie starring Ed Harris. Well, that ought to be a pretty good hint for you. Yes, the artist was Jackson Pollock. This work, titled Going West, done by Pollock. Pollock was a student, as I said, of Thomas Harte Benton, well-known, well-regarded American regionalist painter, and also a muralist. Right? Going West is one of Pollock's earlier works, an example of his early interest in painting style, as well as his own personal history. It's been suggested that this painting was inspired by a family photo of a bridge in Pollock's birthplace, an image of a pioneering family moving west. Perhaps it is also a personal statement of the fact that his family moved west to Arizona and then later to California when Pollock was just a child. The painting also exhibits the influence of Pollock's style of his mentor, Thomas Harte Benton. This is more what you would expect from Jackson Pollock. Many of us, or how many of us rather, appreciate this drip technique. Perhaps some background will help, or not. By 1952, the United States was changing radically, largely because of Senator Joseph McCarthy's enemy within, and because of McCarthy's smear tactics, often on people in the arts. Unable to accept McCarthy's attitude and tactics, Pollock's Convergence may be seen as the embodiment of free speech and freedom of expression, flying in the face of the art establishment and of art convention. Clearly, it shows a rebellious nature and an expression of freedom. Don't let the anti-McCarthy thought fool you into thinking that Pollock was a communist or even a left-leaner. His works were sometimes sponsored by the Congress of Cultural Freedom, an anti-communist group funded by the CIA. Looking at Convergence and also earlier at Guernica, perhaps there's a course on art and politics to be considered. Something for you and me to think about. To give you a little perspective, I'd also like to show you a piece of a mural by Thomas Hart Benton. This section of the mural is called America Today, Instruments of Power, done in 1930 and sponsored by the New York New School of Social Research. It occupies a whole room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art currently. And on to the next one. Many of you familiar with this artist may be familiar with these works or the general idea of these works. I don't think this one is too big a challenge. Some hints: the artist served as a Protestant missionary. The artist was prolific with over 2,100 works, 860 or so oil paintings. Whew. And the artist committed suicide by shooting himself. By now you probably identified the artist as Vincent van Gogh. Two paintings here are April Almond Blossom, that is, and We're being a courtesan. Japanese printmaking was one of Vincent's main sources of inspiration, and he became an enthusiastic collector. The prints acted as a catalyst. They taught him a new way of looking at the world. While there was huge admiration for all things Japanese in the second half of the 19th century, particularly in Van Gogh's Paris, Vincent did not pay much attention to the Japanese at first. Quote, "My studio is quite tolerable, mainly because I've pinned a set of Japanese prints on the wall that I find to be very diverting. You know, these little female figures in gardens or on the shore, the horsemen, flowers, gnarled thorn branches." This he wrote in a letter to his brother Theo, also his art dealer, in 1885. It's likely that his later works were indeed influenced by the Japanese artists, who often left the middle ground of their compositions empty, while objects in the foreground sometimes enlarged. They, the Japanese artists, regularly excluded the horizon too, and abruptly cropped elements of the picture at the edge. Vincent adopted these Japanese visual inventions in his own work. He liked the unusual spatial effects, the expanses of strong color, the everyday objects, and the attention to details from nature. And of course, he liked the exotic and joyful atmosphere. Quote, "After a time, your vision changes. You see with a more Japanese eye. You feel the color differently. I'm convinced that it's precisely through a long stay here at Arles, Arles, that I'll bring out my personality." This he wrote in a letter also to Theo in June of 1888. Van Gogh's relationship to Paul Gauguin is an interesting one. Many people have thought of them as friends, but in fact they were together for only a matter of a couple of months in Arles. Van Gogh wanted to establish a writers' colony, a painters' colony there, and it was his brother, Theo Van Gogh, who was also Gauguin's agent, convinced Gauguin to go there. Gauguin, it turned out, hated Arles and wanted no part of establishing a colony there, and that established quite a conflict between him and Gauguin and Van Gogh. Indeed, they lived together, but they were sort of an odd couple in many ways, including their cleanliness, their work style, etc. Ultimately, it is believed that Gauguin was involved in one way or another with Van Gogh taking his ear, if indeed that was the case. They had an argument when Gauguin expressed the idea that he was going to leave Arles, and the general story is that Van Gogh became depressed and cut off his own ear. Others currently believe that it might have been a somewhat different story and a secret held between the two sometimes friends, Van Gogh and Gauguin. That is, that Van Gogh attacked Gauguin in the street, and Gauguin, who was handy with a saber, pulled out his weapon and waved it or snapped it toward Gauguin, intentionally or accidentally, not clear which, taking Van Gogh's ear off. Van Gogh then weirdly wrapped the ear and presented it to a prostitute in Arles. Gauguin soon left Arles, and there's a lot of word and a lot of thought that this is a secret held between only them until their deaths. Makes for a very interesting story. Here's another landscape with a village that was added, a scene that is not quite technically correct. This artist was born in one country, but famed in another. He moved from realism, seen here, to a more representational form, and even this really is somewhat representational. That is, this painting is not a faithful representation of the scene. Any ideas? This painting, A View of Toledo, was done by Domenicos Theotokopoulos, El Greco, a Greek who became famous for his paintings in the country of Spain. It was painted in around 1600. In this, El Greco's greatest surviving landscape, right, he portrays the city he lived in and worked in for most of his life. The painting belongs to the tradition of emblematic city views rather than faithful documentary description. The view of the eastern section of Toledo from the north would have excluded the cathedral, for example, which the artist therefore imaginatively moved to the left of the Alcazar, the royal palace. Other buildings represented in the painting include the ancient Alcantara Bridge, and on the other side of the River Tagus, the castle of San Servando. Here we have the Vision de Apocalypsis by El Greco, also known as the opening of the fifth seal. It was previously known as Profane Love, done somewhere between 1608 and 1614. Note that in this case, El Greco's typical elongated figures appear. Also known as the Vision of St. John, this painting is the most famous artwork of El Greco's later years. It depicts a passage from the book of Revelation in the New Testament, where the fifth seal is being opened at the end of time, and the souls of the martyrs are crying out to God for deliverance. Many art critics believe that the fifth seal was an influence on Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, often considered to be the first abstract painting. This has led to a great deal of debate and has added very much to the fame of El Greco's masterpiece. And here we have, by Thomas Gainsborough, note the blue sign on his door, a piece called The Cottage Door. These notes are from Wikipedia. Thomas Gainsborough, baptized in 1727, was an English portrait artist and landscape painter, a draftsman and a printmaker. Along with his rival, Sir Joshua Reynolds, he is considered one of the most important British artists of the second half of the 18th century. He painted quickly, and the works of his maturity are characterized by a light palette and easy strokes. Despite his being a prolific portrait painter, Gainsborough really gained greater satisfaction from his landscapes, and indeed he frequently used the landscape scenes as background for his portraits. He's credited with Richard Wilson as the originator of the 18th century British landscape school. Gainsborough was also a founding member of the Royal Society. This painting, late in his career, is an 18th century ideal of a cottage or rural life, making it idyllic and sanitized, probably because his wealthy patients did not really want to see how the poor people lived. Actually, I think that Gainsborough was something of a commercial artist. More familiar, of course, is his painting, The Blue Boy. It's based on the works of Anthony van Dyck, an early 17th century Flemish artist who was also a British court painter. The Blue Boy, however, is not a royal, but rather the son of a hardware merchant. It was sold in 1921 to H.E. Huntington in the United States for $700,000. 1921. That would be roughly $9 million today. This painting is in the Huntington collection and also resides by a painting called Pinky by Thomas Lawrence, done in 1794, a bit after the Blue Boy. They certainly do seem like a pair. Okay, look closely at this one because the painting itself gives you some very good clues to its author. The painter was a 17th century artist, although to my eye this looks a little more modern. Many think that this artist may have used a camera obscura technique or some other mechanical aid because of the accuracy of his paintings, particularly this one. It is signed, if you can find the signature, which I've not covered up. And the painter is Johannes Vermeer. It's called The Little Street, an oil on canvas located in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. The signature, if you look on the left-hand window, is just below the window. It is I.V. Meer. I don't know if you'll be able to see this arrow, but I'll try and we'll see what happens. If you can't see the arrow, you'll know I couldn't do it. The house, which belonged to the artist's aunt, still exists, and you can see it in a passageway called the Penspoort, or the Tripe Gate. Why the Tripe Gate? The aunt was a seller of tripe. Perhaps more familiar is a painting called The Milkmaid, or The Kitchen Maid. Oil and canvas painting of a milkmaid, really a domestic kitchen maid, by Vermeer. A similar maid was actually rendered in the little village. You might have noted it, and I give you a blow up or an enlargement on the right side of this page. The light from the left window was a very common element used by Vermeer. It's also interesting to note the bread crust and the maid herself give it a sense of solidity or weight. Also, the table gives it that sense of solidity very commonly seen in the Vermeer paintings. The print of this hung in my living room for a long time, one of my favorites. I'm also fascinated by the maid's little smile. To my mind, a little Mona Lisa-esque. It's another one that's hard to say. I wonder what she's thinking of as she's doing her daily chores. Ah, something different, something much more modern looking. This painter played the fiddle and sang, as well as painted, overcame beginnings in a shtetl, a little village, and is really famous for some glass at Hadassah. That is, Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. It is, of course, Marc Chagall. We all know, he said, that a good person can be a bad artist, but no one will ever be a genuine artist unless he is also a great human being, and thus also a good one. Interesting quote. Chagall, born Moshe Chagall in Vitebsk, Russia in 1887. Little connection here. My wife's grandfather was the same age and born in the same city. And she's also wondered whether Chagall and her grandfather might have known each other. Instead of remaining trapped in his humble confinement, he took violin and singing lessons and began to draw. Spoke Russian rather than the more common Yiddish of the shtetl. Above all, he made contact with the bourgeois world of Paris, where cosmopolitan and cultural interests were valued. Red Nude is an early Impressionist painting completed on Chagall's admission to the Zanzeva School in St. Petersburg, Russia, where he was exposed to the works of artists such as Gauguin and Matisse. Indeed, the color in this makes you think or understand his connections with having seen works of Matisse, the reds and the oranges. He's more familiarly known for the stained glass at the Abdel Synagogue in the Hadassah Hospital in Europe, of which we have an eastern view. and also his paintings. Right? His paintings and lithographs especially have rendered him the quintessential Jewish artist and a pioneer of modernism. He's also completed major stained glass installations for the cathedrals at Reims and Metz, as well as for the United Nations and for the Art Institute of Chicago, a really good place to see his work up close and personal. I've always loved Chagall's whimsy as seen in I and the Village, a kaleidoscopic, dreamlike cubist work. Right? It's composed of childhood memories, and one might note an Orthodox church. Looking in the upper center, you'll see a cross on the building. Right? A Christian man painted in green, a tree of life in the bottom center. Other childhood Russian memories and common Chagall themes, such as the cow, the milkmaid, the man with the scythe, the upside down woman. Wish I could afford it. Here's a close-up of the peace window in the United Nations to really get a feel for the kind of work that Chagall has done in glass, and also see many of those themes common to Chagall. Excuse me. As we move on to yet another artist. Strange looking painting. It is indeed a peacock playing the piano, of course, with a man's face. Wonder what that means. It was painted after, not before, the artist's most famous work. That's a little unusual in the series that I've been showing you. And the artist can be thought of as a mama's boy. If that one doesn't tip who it is, I don't know what will. Of course, it's James McNeill Whistler. This painting, however, called The Gold Scab, an eruption in filthy, not a misprint, filthy lucre from 1879. It's also known as The Creditor. This painting is a caricature of Whistler's patron, Frederick R. Leland, a British shipping magnate. Note the frilly, hence the word filthy, shirt. At the time of this painting, Whistler had gone into bankruptcy, and Leland was his main creditor. The painting is sometimes referred to as the Lost Symphony. More familiar might be Whistler's arrangement in gray and black, also known as a portrait of the artist's mother, or indeed simply Whistler's mother. This most famous American painting was actually painted in London and is sometimes called the Victorian Mona Lisa. In need of money, Whistler actually pawned the painting during his lifetime. The painting also appeared on a U.S. stamp, which I show here, issued in 1934 for Mother's Day. Actually, the stamp elicited some controversy, not so much because it was a portrait of a work of art, but because it was altered. Notice in the stamp, the painting on the wall, a painting by Whistler of a Whistler work, and the curtain have disappeared, and a vase of flowers mysteriously does appear. This one might surprise you more. Note the flat forms and the linear structure of the painting. These straight line trees, the rectangular bank, etc. It was done by a 20th century Dutch master who was noted for non-representational painting. Any ideas yet? The artist, Piet Mondrian, the farm near Duivendrecht. Took me a long time to figure out that pronunciation. And strong lines dominate this scene of a farmhouse at twilight. The dwindling light at the end of the day creates a halo of vibrant orange around the interlocking web of barren trees. It highlights the linear patterns created by their branches. Mondrian often visited this farm near Duivendrecht, a small village near Amsterdam, and made many paintings of the building and the surrounding trees. This scene captures his attentiveness to the nuances of light, shadow, and reflection. The painting simultaneously hints at the artist's growing interest in the flattening of forms and the linear structures of his later fully abstract paintings. Though Mondrian is best known for his non-representational paintings, his basic vision was rooted in landscape. He was particularly inspired by the flat topography of his native Holland, a subject which he returned to even after he began working in an abstract form. That happened after he attended an exhibition of Cubist paintings, including Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso in 1911. Mondrian first sketched this form around 1905. 9 of the 20 known paintings related to this form, and drawings thereof, however, were created later during the World War I. Mondrian likely returned to the subject because his wartime patrons generally preferred his early naturalistic compositions to his more recent experiments. I think even in this early work we can start to see the world as Mondrian saw it. I've added some simple geometry and the flattened image starts to appear. There it comes. This is where you can start to really get an idea of where Mondrian was going. Have a look at this later work. Composition with red, plain, yellow, black, gray, and blue. Interesting title. Take a close look at it. Can you start to reconstruct a three-dimensional subject that might have been the basis for this work? Can you imagine where there might have been a landscape hidden into this picture? I wonder if I can. Okay, we can have a little fun with this one. 3 of the paintings here, these rather expensive paintings, were not done by John Singer Sargent. They were, in fact, completed by someone better known for another career. As a matter of fact, for 2 other careers. The painter was known for his literature. He was known as a writer, having done some 14 nonfiction books or series, and also known for at least 4 works of fiction and 4 other miscellany. But even that wasn't the thing for which he was best known. He was actually best known as the still something else. Any idea of who it is? Well, you're looking at the works of Winston Spencer Churchill, primarily known as the wartime Prime Minister, that is World War II, of Great Britain. A terrific man indeed. He was a very good painter, and indeed, as a matter of fact, one of his books was actually titled Painting for Pleasure. Among the pictures here, I'd like you to notice two things. One, the similarity of troops going to the front and John Singer Sargent's work, Gassed. I suspect that Sargent influenced Churchill to a great extent. And the second one is the goldfish pool at Chartwell from 1965, Churchill's last painting. He gave this painting, interestingly, to his chauffeur, and that painting ultimately sold for £1.8 million. Quite a gift for driving someone around for all of those years. But given what I know of Churchill's personality, it might not have been too much of a paycheck. So I really enjoyed showing these paintings to you. And now we come to the last in the group of paintings I'd like to show you today. These paintings have something in common, actually two things in common. One, they were all painted by entertainers. Two, all of these entertainers have a name in common. Any idea of what that name is? And in fact, while we're at it, do you have any idea of who has done these paintings? Three different painters. As a hint, I like to call this set Tony, Tony, Tony. The first painting, Street Signs, was completed by Antonio Rudolfo Lacaca Quinn, that is the famous actor Tony Quinn, also quite renowned as a painter and quite successful. The second, not by a film actor, but an equally famous Tony. Any thoughts on this? Well, a painter is Antonio Benedetto, born in Queens and better known as singer Tony Bennett. And what a singer and what a long career he has had. Starting in the 1940s and being recognized by none less than Frank Sinatra as the greatest singer of his era. And yet, even with that early start and early success, he was still making records well into the 2000s and very successfully, among them being a series of duets, one of which with Lady Gaga became a gigantic hit with young people. That's absolutely amazing to have what's essentially a 60-year singing career and still going. What a man. The third and last one is by a Tony whose name is not Tony, or at least that's not the name his parents gave him. That one is Bernard Schwartz, better known to some of you as Tony Curtis, a film actor from my era, very, very popular and a very competent actor, but also quite a competent and accomplished painter. And so we draw to a close. I'm very happy to have spent this time with you. Thank you so much. I really have enjoyed our time together, and I hope you've enjoyed it too, that you've been a little bit entertained and somewhat occupied in these difficult times with something a little different to do. I hope we'll be able to spend some time together, perhaps in this venue, but I hope really that from sometime in the future, we'll be back in the face-to-face venue at OLLI. That would be a great pleasure. I wish you all great happiness, and in this time, more importantly, perhaps, great health. See you all soon. Bye.